Hello, and welcome to episode 68 of Prose. This week, travel back in time to a small pond in Yell County, Arkansas, and freeze by a bonfire in the wake of a breakup and a loss of self. Yet again this week, I will forego my usual pleas for everyone to leave ratings, reviews, and to subscribe, and I will simply beg you all this. Share this show with one person. One person that likes podcasts, that enjoys fiction, that likes DIY projects, that is bored on their commute. One person that is a literature fiend, just someone. That can go a very long way, and I can't tell you how much that would mean to me and for the podcast. Thank you for listening, and let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have On the Lake and Sasha leading. Enjoy. Just as a note, this story is to wish my father a very happy birthday. Happy birthday, Dad. On the Lake, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Poolin Pond saw great swaths of my childhood play out on its shores, about its grounds, and on its ever-placid surface. That small reservoir in Yell County might be small to my adult eye, but to a child, it was as mighty and as influential as the ocean. Very early on, I was allowed to go to the shore and hold a rod and reel. Those initial setups were simple dollar store click-and-throw style pieces. A child's toy, really. I would put my squishy plastic worm on and play at fishing alongside my father and uncle. For the first few years of my play acting and miming, they did not even give me a hook with which to catch anything. I was happy just being there, staring out at the glassy surface. Cast, ripples, sit, sip sodas, sit, hear them quietly drawl out philosophy, politics, theology, sit. Excitement would come when one of them saw their bobber go down. The line would give a few tugs, and the undisturbed surface of the pond would erupt in even more ripples. More often than not, their quarry didn't get away. My soft heart ached for the little brim and crappie and perch, and from time to time catfish as they fought for air once they'd been brought in and tossed into our cooler to wait out the remainder of our trip. But, being so young, I didn't fully grasp that the creatures were dying slow deaths in order for me to have my feast the coming Sunday. My focus was more on the inevitable fish fry than it was the existential crises that would mar my later excursions into fishing and hunting. Once I'd proven myself a good, quiet, and focused companion, and once I'd grown out of some of my fumbling childhood awkwardness and lack of dexterity, my father and uncle began to teach me how to use real hooks and real live bait. Night crawlers, grubs, crickets, minnows, bits of leftover chicken, bits of leftover frog. Half the fun of being trusted with the live bait was going on the hunt for the little creatures that would give their lives so that I could stalk bigger, wetter prey. Looking back, I also had problems impaling those smaller creatures, but I'd close my eyes, pop them on the hook, and move forward with my time at the pond, always wanting to impress the two older men to whom I looked for guidance and as an example on what a man should be, what a man should do. Again, the sacrosanct Sunday fish fry loomed large in my imagination, large enough to get me past the crunch of a carapace and the pained wiggle of impaled fish flesh. Cast, ripples, sit, sip sodas, sit, Hear them quietly drawl out philosophy, politics, theology. Sit. Sit. The real adventures came when my father and uncle pooled their paltry funds, went in together, and bought a small 3-man fiberglass boat. It was barely a boat. More some fused fiberglass with some blue scratchy indoor-outdoor carpet as interior. The 2 men, 2 tackle boxes, 3 when I was old enough to take my own little one, and I barely fit into the rickety old thing, but we felt like kings. I knew so even back then. My father and my uncle both proclaimed it to be so time and time again as we pushed into pulling. Out on the water, the tranquility was enhanced exponentially. We were one with the water, one with nature. I marveled at the scenes I was blessed to see unfold. Small terrapins sunning on logs, larger, braver fish doing acrobatics out of the water and down back in again. Cranes swooping in to snag a late breakfast or an early snack. Copperheads lively making their way across the pond, deadly grace apparent even at a healthy distance. Enormous snappers sliding into the water, the large leviathans immediately making young me think about the dinosaurs with which I was obsessed. Nature unfolded before us, morning after morning, and I could not help but love it. The fishing and conversation were the same, though. That was perfect. Cast, ripples, sit. Sip sodas, sit. Hear them quietly drawl out philosophy, politics, theology. Sit, sit, sit. Sometimes, my mother and aunt would join us, and we would all do an overnight at the little camping space allotted to few visitors wanting to stay over at the pond. The only real difference between those times and the times when it was just the men was that I could wave to my mother from the middle of the undisturbed water as we sat, sipping our off-brand to an off-brand sodas and awaiting another bite. She and my aunt would read, play cards, bask in nature, enjoying one another's company. More quiet reflection embraced by a slower world. As I grew older, I, of course, began to realize that though Pullin Pond was Pacific in the true sense of the word, it was not the Pacific. The world grew smaller, and with it the pond and the slice of nature I so revered. Even as the world shrank around me, I still enjoyed the time with my uncle and my father. Conversations became more strained as I aged. I began to be included, and I began to fully understand the ins and outs of what was being discussed, which, again, shifted in later years. Cast, ripples, sit, sip sodas, sit. We 3 quietly drawl out money problems, sports, health problems, the weather, general problems. Sit, 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 sit. After childhood raced by, adolescence and early adulthood all but flashed and were gone. I am far from old now, but I am nothing close to young either. In fact, I am the age my father and my uncle were when they first took me to Pullin Pond. I could not count the years since last I went fishing, since last I was with people who loved me unequivocally, since last I allowed myself to get lost in the quiet and serenity of the natural world. I have not been back to the pond in what can now be counted in decades, and that alone makes my thoughts wander. Those slower times and that tranquil pond are worth more than almost anything I've encountered in my adult years. I hear cutesy, bottled adages like, money doesn't make you happy until it does, and the billionaire's joke is always funny, and you don't see the power of it until you have it. I am far from well off now that I am well into my working years, but I am much better off than we were back then. Though I didn't realize it at the time, and indeed not until I was much, much older and well into my collegiate ventures, we fished out at Pool and Pond to eat. If we didn't catch that perch, that crappie, that brim, that occasional catfish, if we didn't set up that sacrosanct Sunday fish fry, we'd have been a much hungrier lot. Of course, my not knowing was by design. There were times when we didn't catch any fish. That was inevitable. My little belly never went empty, though. It was my father, my uncle, my mother, my aunt. They were hungry. And yet, we all five of us, reach back across the years and venerate those memories above all others. Those times of togetherness and love and reflection out on our little pond, they are the best. We might as well have been royalty. The world could not touch us, and we were monarchs of our moment. If I could buy an early morning before dawn drive down to Pool and Pond with my still present and unbroken father, my healthy and fully aware uncle, my joyous and unsullied mother, my perky and confident aunt, my more innocent self, and my younger brother come early enough to enjoy those older days, why, I would give all the petty creature comforts and financial windfalls hard work, sacrifice, time, and an education have afforded me in some measure. What I wouldn't give. Cast, ripples, sit, sip sodas, sit. All of us quietly drawl out philosophy, politics, theology, funny reminiscences, heartfelt encouragements, plans for the next upcoming holiday, how we would celebrate Nanny Mom's birthday, when we thought the next trip down to Mississippi to see Grandma and Grandpa would be, the contents of the garden that were doing well, the contents of the garden that weren't doing well, Daddy's ideas for sermons for tomorrow, my new favorite cartoons, Mom's challenges at school, Uncle's plans, Auntie's dreams, anything and everything we could speak of, no matter how banal, saturated with love and support and understanding and unflinching loyalty. Sit, 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 sit. Thank you for listening to On the Lake, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds you hear come from freesound.org and are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. All music you hear come from the Free Music Archive at freemusicarchive.org, and they are also being used under CC 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. Next up this week, we have a story that is a departure from what we just heard. Sasha leaving will delve into the downsides and darkness of a breakup. Stick around and enjoy. Sasha Leaving, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. As he watched Sasha walk away with her three friends, Nick finally realized he was lesser than he once was. He also realized that, from this point forward, he would be the warm father figure. His days as anything even remotely resembling a viable sexual partner, a desirable physical specimen, were done, breezing out in the wake of Sasha's exit. To make matters worse, Candace had arrived to the small housewarming party. Shimmering through the gathering, flirtily chirping hollow banter with anyone and everyone that would give her an ounce of attention. Sasha did not feel a romantic connection with Nick, but Candace had once, and she had very publicly, very harshly let him know that the feelings and thoughts in that direction were nothing more than a mistake on her part, born of mystifying sunsets, shared travel, and circumstance. Those feelings were guided by such specific people and places that, when those people and places changed, her perception of the feelings changed along with them. Mere possibility of the opportunity for different faces, different bodies, varied affections, launched her away from Nick and into anyone's arms that could make her feel young or different, even if but for a fleeting moment. The fire in the in-ground outdoor fire pit crackled and popped, framing the 50-some-odd conversations buzzing and lilting all around him. Feelings of loneliness washed over Nick, and he felt utterly worthless there in the midst of the chilled evening air. Even with Sasha clearly signaling the newly cemented boundaries of their relationship, he had at least had her present and cheerily distracting him from the weight of his disconnectedness from the people surrounding him, from the world at large even. Her departure left him immersed in the same brand of superficial interactions that Candace was so eagerly seeking out. He half-heartedly participated in the dance, cringing while maintaining a beaming, if straining, smile. Candace's presence only pushed him further into himself and magnified his epiphanic moment, his opportunity for the type of relationship he wanted, a family, a well-dreamt-of future that younger Nick had long since penned for himself. That had died when Candace told him he was not good enough and not actually worth the investment of her time into those infinite shared futures. He looked up, seeking to see anything that might divert him from his current descent into darker places of himself. Instead, there was Candace, surrounded by men seeking her out, the smell of her desperate need for male attention radiating in waves and drawing in the singles at the party. Johnson, the former athlete turned hippie with the girlfriend conveniently abroad. Moshi, the former football star with a love of men's fashion and accessorizing. Ben, a business school graduate that far preferred talking lacrosse to finance. Dalton, the newest acquaintance to join the rather large accepting friend group, his most recent brocation to Cancun, and his I almost went pro baseball stories being loudly proclaimed to anyone wishing to get to know him better. There were others coming and going, trying to establish their interest to Candace and to the party at large, but those four had tasted the chum and couldn't avoid sharking, steadily moving in for the kill, each predator vying for primacy. She laughed too loudly. She smiled too broadly. But then again, who wouldn't when the world lifts you up and proclaims you worthy of worship? Nick's cynicism sought to beat out his despondency. He had named each one of these men as eventual fucks for Candace almost a year in advance. If there was one thing he knew, it was human nature. If there was something he knew even better, it was Candace's nature and how urgent her needs for male approval and veneration were. Those venomous thoughts did nothing to warm him, and he was too far away from the small fire to get any warmth from it either. The party was already winding down. Little pockets of would-be lovers, could-be friends, people faking their desire to be around one another were breaking off to head into the night toward smaller, impromptu get-togethers, where the drinking would rage on, the pot would be lit, and decision-making, in general, would give way to animal impulse, made courageous and bolstered by these life-giving substances. Candace left with precisely who he said she would roughly 4 months ago, when this was a hot topic of conversation among his group of friends. They, of course, wanted him to weigh in. They had no idea how much Nick hated his gift for reading the laughably similar denizens of humanity, Candace in particular. She stumbled forward in her 2 high heels. One of her 5 men, was it now, in total? 1 on each arm. The owner of the apartment foregoing the grabbing and leading the charge, well out in front. The other 2 potential suitors watching her ass as she trudged forward. No invitations came floating over to Nick, though. Not that he wanted an invitation to any of these smaller after-parties. In truth, he didn't know how he'd kept his composure the entire time he'd been at this engagement. Bleary eyes were threatening to quickly turn into out-and-out teary eyes, and the weight in his chest was now matched by the nausea he had in the very core of his being, going well beyond some simple sick stomach feeling. He had to get home. Home to what? A cold, dark house where he existed in perpetual twilight, if he were being honest with himself. But that place of cool darkness was better than this place of flashing lights, crackling fires, false friends, altars of superficiality. It was better than rejection after rejection being heaped out upon him publicly. Nick sighed and went to toss his beer can into the recycling. He had been holding an empty can for well over 2 hours, just to avoid having to mill through the crowd and grab another one. It was better this way anyway. Alcohol wouldn't do him any favors in meting out his feelings and reactions to the night's happenings. He needed a clear head to balance out his lead-heavy heart. He knew what Candace would be doing in the better part of 2 hours, but he wondered after Sasha. She'd left him reeling, but she'd at least attempted to leave him in warmth and kindness, and in a good-spirited way. Maybe that was what was worth hanging on to as he made his way home in the chill. He heard, "Oh, stop!" and some giggling from well ahead, reverberating off the trees and houses. One of those 5 future fucks had made a joke or grabbed Candace's ass or flexed in a silly way. The exclamation jolted what little warmth Sasha had left him with away from Nick. He shivered and made his way home into the darkness. Thank you for listening to Sasha Leaving, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. The musical track in the background of this story is from freesound.org. It is being used under a CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication License. In fact, all the sounds come from freesound.org, and all of them are under those Universal Public Domain Dedication Licenses. That does it for Prose this week. I hope you enjoyed the stories, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for yet another episode. Have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday, and to be consistent with my cheesiness, I do continue to pray you love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always stranger than fiction.